I'm Patrick Byers, Horticulture Field Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. The 2021 season is certainly a challenging season for Missouri tree fruit farmers. Sub-zero temperatures in February, combined with untimely spring frosts in April, have led to reduced or lost tree fruit crops. The challenge ahead, how to manage trees that have lost a fruit crop. Fruit trees such as peaches and apples are susceptible to cold temperature damage every year in Missouri. Midwinter cold in December, January, and February can lead to the loss of flower buds and, in extreme cases, damage to woody plant parts. This is more often a situation with peaches. Spring frost, however, poses a risk to all fruit crops, and temperatures below freezing during the flowering period can lead to loss of flower buds and developing fruit. The first step in developing a management strategy in response to crop loss is to assess the actual damage. In the case of damage to flower buds or woody plant parts during the midwinter period, wait a few days after the cold temperatures and then cut the buds. As we see in this right picture looking at the floral parts of peaches, it's fairly easy to tell which are damaged. The bud on the right is damaged and the bud on the left is undamaged. Frost during the flowering period can also be assessed by examining the floral parts. The most sensitive part of a flower to cold temperatures is the pistil, the reproductive portion of the flower. This is the part that would be examined on both a peach or an apple. Once an estimation of the level of damage is made, then it's important to estimate the crop load and to determine if there is sufficient crop remaining to make management of that crop profitable. Managing an orchard in the absence of a crop is definitely different than managing that same orchard if the crop is present, and it's important for the farmer to develop a management strategy in light of the current situation. The first thing to consider is pruning. Now, if there is an assessment of damage that occurred in advance of pruning, then the farmer can consider a less severe pruning approach to retain surviving fruit buds. This would be the case, for example, if there were 20% or more of the flower buds on a peach tree surviving midwinter cold. It's also important to consider the position of the surviving buds in fruit. Sometimes in the case of spring frost, the lower branches of the tree can lose the crop, while the upper branches of the tree may retain the crop. It's very interesting, but sometimes there is a stratification of cold air layers near the ground, which can lead to damage in the lower parts of the tree. There can be a situation, too, in the absence of a crop where the trees exhibit excessive vigor, and summer pruning may be a tool to help manage this excessive vigor. Another important consideration in managing an orchard in the absence of a fruit crop is fertilization. Now, a fruit tree, even without a crop, still needs nutrients to support vegetative growth and the development of flower buds for next year's crop. But fruit trees in the absence of a crop do not need the same amount of nutrients, particularly nitrogen, as an orchard that has a crop. As a rule of thumb, a fruit tree without a crop will require roughly half the nitrogen of the tree if it would have a crop present. Farmers frequently consider split applications of nitrogen, particularly with early flowering crops such as peaches, where half of the perceived needs of nitrogen for the season are applied as growth begins, and the other half is applied when the crop is assured. For example, at shuck split or even a bit later with peaches. Pest management can be a challenge in an orchard in the absence of a crop. Because of the reduced income potential from this orchard, frequently farmers are considering ways to save money. But this doesn't mean that pests don't need to be managed. In the absence of a crop, however, pest management switches from managing fruit and the vegetative part of the tree to managing the vegetative part of the tree. And frequently spray programs are less intense. Looking at this picture, for example, obviously brown rot on the fruit is not a consideration if the peach orchard is lacking a crop. It is important, however, as spray programs are adjusted, perhaps with fewer applications, perhaps with applications that are using less expensive chemicals, to watch out for incidental pests. There are a number of fruit pests that are managed quite well in the course of a more typical spray program that can become problems in years where the spray program is less intense. So keep an eye out for incidental pests. In the case of peaches, for example, the spray program frequently is greatly reduced in an orchard that does not have a crop. The sprays that are put out for managing peach tree borer, for example, and perhaps the generation of oriental fruit moth that affect the growing points are really about the only insecticide sprays that are needed in a typical peach orchard that lacks a crop. In the case of an orchard that has lost the crop, of course, management focuses on the current season and how to manage these trees without a fruit crop. But it's also important to consider the implications of a lack of crop this year on the way the orchard will be managed next year. In the case of peaches, it's possible that there may be excessive vigor, excessive vegetative growth, particularly if the trees have been over-fertilized from the standpoint of nitrogen, and it may be necessary to adjust pruning during the upcoming dormant season, perhaps heavier pruning. It's also likely that there'll be increased bud set on the tree that lacks a crop this year, and these buds frequently exhibit some degree of hardiness. So it's likely that we'll have an increased amount of flower buds, perhaps increased flowering next spring. It's important to think about pruning to control this crop. And in fact, pruning is an important way to help manage the crop. And then once the fruit is set, next year we'll expect to be thinning more vigorously. In an apple orchard that has lost the crop, it's frequently a situation where there'll be excessive flower bud set for the next year. And a frequent situation in an orchard following a year without a crop is to have an extremely heavy crop. And if not managed correctly, this situation can lead to biennial bearing. So very important to consider an adequate thinning program in the growing season following a year without a crop. For more information on managing orchards in the absence of a crop, reach out to the University of Missouri Extension Horticulture Field Specialist who is assigned to your county. Find your county of interest. Reach out to the specialist. If you live in a county that has an open position, reach out to the specialist who is located closest to you. I'm sure they'll be happy to help.